The Doom soundtrack is the most important and innovative metal album of the 2010s. For anyone who isn't a metalhead or is confused by what I mean, allow me to explain. Metal experienced its birth as a genre in the early 70s with bands like Black Sabbath, and slowly evolved with bands such as Judas Priest, Venom, Metallica, and Death. It was an exciting new genre that was pushing boundaries and introducing radically new sounds into the music world. It was largely responsible for normalizing vocal methods like harsh screaming and guttural growls, as well as instrumental techniques like the double bass drum. With every decade came new bands and new styles that continually pushed the genre forward into new territory. However, as time marches on, music that was once new and radical becomes a normal part of the music world's fabric. And as we entered the 21st century, other music continued to evolve and change, but metal largely stayed the same. And ultimately, the larger musical zeitgeist moved past metal to other genres as metal reveled in the nostalgia of its own heyday. In the 2010s, most of the best metal albums were from veteran bands that had been around for decades, if not since the beginning of the genre. Many of the newer bands that were cropping up were latching onto the old, classic sounds typically associated with metal, without providing much in the way of experimentation or innovation. There were also gimmicky bands that blended radically different styles of music, like the Japanese band Baby Metal, which combined various styles of metal with the sound of Japanese pop idol music. While bands like this have a sound that is entertaining and novel, it isn't one that is easily replicated or built upon, and it certainly doesn't present any real direction for the metal genre moving forward. Arguably, the last real innovation of the genre was 2000s metalcore. Though it's a style that began in the 90s, the following decade was when metalcore bands such as Killswitch Engage and Bring Me the Horizon gained mainstream acceptance and became the new representation of what metal was for an entire generation of kids. However, since the end of the 2000s, not much has changed within metal. So, what's going on exactly? Why has metal largely stagnated in the past 2 decades? An outsider may point to the lack of experimentation within the music of new, up-and-coming acts, but that in itself really stems from an issue that lies within the larger culture surrounding the metal genre. There's a sizable portion of the metal community that refuses to accept newer styles, namely nu metal, metalcore, and alternative metal among others. As a result, these styles of music are banished to a genreless existence, cursed to exist in a purgatory where they're too metal for most people who like hard rock, but too different for more conservative metalheads to give them the time of day. We could spend an entire video breaking down all the reasons these styles are often barred from being considered true metal, but in my estimation, most of these reasons tend to boil down to a sincere desire to disassociate the genre one loves from the kind of music that one hates. And I honestly get that, because I feel the exact same way every time my ears are assaulted by the sound of Limp Bizkit. However, as much as I would like to cherry pick things I dislike and excommunicate them from my favorite music genre, gatekeeping is ultimately an asinine and sophomoric practice because the vast majority of people just aren't good at doing it. So instead, I hold my tongue and try my best to be as reasonably inclusive as possible. However, many in the metal community do not share my view. One of the more popular metal acts of the 2010s, Ghost, which blends styles of classic metal with elements of pop music, is often dismissed as either being rock music or just straight up top 40 pop. At the end of the day, these more conservative listeners will reject any music that deviates too much from their preconceived idea of what metal music should be, and there's pretty much nothing anyone can say to dissuade them from such a deeply personal belief. The rejection of experimentation within metal likely came from the 90s era of popular metal music. While the underground scene was still brimming with exciting new acts, the bands that became popular in the 80s started experimenting with other sounds that were trending during the 90s. Artists like Judas Priest, Metallica, Testament, and Iron Maiden, among others, went through phases of experimentation in the 90s where new styles such as grunge rock and nu metal were incorporated into their sound. Most of these forays into new territory yielded less than stellar results, so despite earning the bands in question more airtime on mainstream radio, they were understandably criticized by many metalheads as abandoning their heavy metal roots in favor of appealing to a broader audience. Instances such as this within metal's history ultimately led to a deep-seated aversion to experimentation out of the scene's traditionally accepted sounds, especially when it comes to the experimentation that incorporates trendier sounds. What's unfortunate is that this mindset is so deeply embedded into the genre at this point that it becomes one of the main factors preventing it from moving forward. Even if musicians themselves don't hold to this belief, its prevalence creates an air of caution surrounding experimentation. If you're creating a new metal band and you have the choice of risking ridicule by experimenting with the new sound, or leaning into a guaranteed audience by playing the kind of music that everyone already likes and accepts, it's not exactly a difficult choice to make if you want your band to go anywhere in the metal scene. So while this mindset is not accepted by all who listen to metal, it's common enough that it essentially freezes metal in time, cursing the genre to be left behind as the rest of the music world moves on to newer territory. By the midpoint of the 2010s, it was hard to see the possibility of any new innovation within the metal genre that would be widely accepted. But in 2016, the solution to metal's dilemma came in the form of Doom. The soundtrack to the 2016 video game Doom, composed by guitarist Mick Gordon, was able to put metal back into the cultural limelight in a way that united metalheads and broader audiences alike. The way Gordon did this was by combining 3 different musical styles: industrial metal, djent, and electronic. Industrial metal has its roots in the late 80s, gaining mass popularity with artists like 9 Inch Nails, and even being accepted in the underground scene of metal with more extreme acts like Fear Factory. Meanwhile, djent is a newer style of metal that popped up in the 2000s as a result of the radically experimental sound of the band Meshuggah, particularly their albums Nothing, Catch 33, and Obzip. Their unique tone, fusion of extreme metal and jazz-influenced songwriting, and their influence on laying down heavy grooves inspired a whole wave of artists deep within the metal scene, laying the foundation for Doom's sound. Gordon blended this unique metal fusion with electronic music, which is arguably the key to its success. Electronic music was already commercially viable. Dubstep and synthwave were proving to be extremely popular styles of music in the 2010s, so using them in tandem with the industrial djent helped make the soundtrack appeal to the mass public, as well as gamers and veteran Doom fans who were already privy to electronic music thanks to gaming's history with it. But most importantly, using electronic elements in the soundtrack helped the music feel modern. Even if they don't immediately connect with the pummeling metal guitar work, people who listen to Doom's soundtrack will be able to latch onto the electronic elements weaved throughout as a sound they are already familiar with and enjoy, which allows them to more easily accept hallmarks of metal which they may have previously written off as incomprehensible noise. By combining established and new styles of metal with electronic flourishes, Mick Gordon was able to craft something that felt remarkably refreshing and unique to the 21st century. While past experiments to blend metal with trending sounds have failed, Mick Gordon executed the perfect blend of 2 different but similar genres, as electronic music often veers into dark and heavy territory. Its imagery also tends to be a mirror of metal with the focus on distortion and themes inspired from horror movies and the occult. Some of its biggest artists like Carpenter Brut have even openly admitted to being heavily inspired by metal. Electronic fusions with metal have been tried before to varying success, but Gordon was able to find the perfect blend that made the music fresh enough to appeal to new audiences, but not too far out that it alienated metal's core listeners. As a result, the soundtracks for Doom and Doom Eternal are some of the most universally beloved collections of metal music to hit the mainstream in a long time. It's hard to find people who don't like the sound of Mick Gordon's fusion of brutality. In my own experience, I've seen tons of people say they don't like metal too much, but love Doom's soundtrack. However, what those people fail to foresee is the near future when they're putting bands like Meshuggah and Animals as leaders onto their playlist to try to get into more Doom-adjacent music, and before they know it, they just straight up like metal. And I've definitely seen this happen more than once. Within the last decade, Doom has been a huge gateway for new people to get into metal music, and one that would not have existed otherwise. For me, metal was actually my gateway into Doom. Doom came out at a time in my life when I wasn't really playing video games at all. Then, one of my metal-headed college friends showed me the Doom soundtrack and I was in love. I bought a PS4 just so I could play Doom, and I bought the game months before I even had the money to buy the console. While less important to its musical advancements, the fact that it's the soundtrack to a great first-person shooter game is certainly a huge part of its appeal. I'm sure that, like myself, many metalheads have fond memories of playing video games while they blasted their favorite metal music in the background. For me, it was hours-long play sessions of Halo accompanied by a soundtrack of bands like Megadeth and Soilwork. And thanks to Doom, many other people get to experience the same badass feeling of destroying your enemies accompanied by the most brutal music on the planet. To no surprise, lots of people have found out through playing it that they really like this feeling. The brutality of the game's concept is another big reason the game fits so well with its metal soundtrack. The game is essentially about going to hell to fight demons, a story setup that seems lifted right out of a metal album. Doom's massive popularity over the past 6 years has slowly cemented it as the new standard for what metal should sound like in the 21st century, and other metal bands have already started to take note. Gimmick bands have already cropped up, blatantly copying the sound of Gordon's soundtrack. Meanwhile, other bands have taken a more organic influence from it. Code Orange started incorporating elements of industrial metal and glitchy electronics into their metalcore formula to great critical success, and Bring Me the Horizon even brought on Mick Gordon himself to produce an entire EP, resulting in some of the best material they've released in a long time. Doom's influence can even be seen affecting more traditional styles of metal and their most respected artists. For example, Corpse Grinder, the lead singer of Cannibal Corpse, recently released a solo album which has an album cover strikingly similar to Doom's box art. But Doom's influence has gone beyond affecting music and is now influencing other elements of pop culture. In 2021, the movies Nobody and Malignant both sported tracks in their scores that sounded like they were lifted straight out of the Mick Gordon playbook. From this, it's clear that Gordon's work has made a huge and lasting impact on the way metal has been perceived and executed throughout modern media. This widespread influence shows that the seeds of change have clearly been planted, so hopefully what Mick Gordon was able to do with the Doom soundtrack can be the inspiration for a new wave of brutal experimentation within the metal scene, and bring the genre into a new age where it can rip, tear, and dominate once more.